My name is Natalie Ellis, and I was 22 years old the morning my father brought his affair partner to my college graduation, like she had earned a seat in my life. I remember the weather first. It was one of those bright Virginia mornings that looked too clean to hold anything ugly. The kind of morning universities put on brochures. Blue sky, fresh-cut grass, parents in linen shirts, girls in white dresses under black gowns. Fathers carrying flowers, mothers fixing tassels, grandparents crying before anyone had even walked across the stage. I stood near the edge of the main lawn at Whitmore State University with my cap tucked under one arm and a grocery store bouquet in the other. My mother had brought it, 6 yellow roses wrapped in clear plastic with one of those little silver stickers that said, "Congratulations, graduate." The sticker was crooked. The flowers were not expensive. I knew that because I had worked at the same grocery store during sophomore year, stocking apples and ringing up birthday balloons for people who looked like they had never counted the change in their own wallets. But my mother had stood in line to buy them. She had probably looked at the bigger bouquets first, the ones with lilies and ribbon and baby's breath, then done the math in her head the way I had watched her do my whole life. Rent, gas, student loan payment, groceries, 6 yellow roses. I loved them so much it hurt. "You look beautiful," Mom said. Her name is Laura Ellis, and if sacrifice had a face, it would look like her. 46 years old, soft brown hair pulled into a low bun, navy dress she had worn to 3 weddings and 1 funeral, and shoes I knew were pinching because she kept shifting her weight when she thought I wasn't looking. I smiled anyway. "You always say that." "Because I'm always right." She reached up and fixed the edge of my graduation hood, even though it was already straight. Her hands trembled a little, not from nerves, from exhaustion. She had worked the late shift at the hospital library the night before, then driven 4 hours before sunrise because she said no daughter of hers was walking across the stage without her mother in the crowd. That was my mom. Quiet, tired, there. My father had texted at 7:16 that morning. "Proud of you, kiddo. Wouldn't miss it." I stared at that message for longer than I should have. My father, Richard Ellis, had missed plenty. He missed my senior night in high school because of a client dinner that turned out to be a weekend in Asheville with Celeste. He missed move-in day freshman year because he said traffic was impossible, though his Instagram showed him on a boat. He missed my 21st birthday, then sent a gift card to a restaurant that had closed 6 months earlier. But graduation was different. Graduation was public, and Richard Ellis rarely missed a public chance to look like a good father. Mom glanced over my shoulder toward the parking lot. I followed her eyes and saw him before I was ready. Dad was walking across the lawn in a gray suit, sunglasses on, hair silver at the temples in the exact way that made strangers trust him. He had always known how to enter a room, or a church, or a parent-teacher conference he had not prepared for. He came with one hand raised, smiling like the day had been waiting for him, and on his arm was Celeste Monroe. She wore white. Not cream, not beige, white. A fitted dress, sharp heels, gold bracelet, hair blown out in soft waves that moved in the breeze like she had brought her own lighting crew. She carried no flowers. Instead, she held her phone up, recording the lawn, the graduates, the proud families, and finally me. "There she is," Dad called. Celeste smiled at the camera and then at me. "We wouldn't miss our girl's big day," she said. Our girl. 2 words. That was all it took. My chest tightened so suddenly I had to remind myself to breathe. Celeste had not helped me fill out financial aid forms at midnight. Celeste had not mailed me $20 bills folded inside birthday cards with notes that said, "Buy yourself coffee and don't argue." Celeste had not sat on the bathroom floor with me when I cried because my scholarship did not cover winter textbooks. She was the woman whose perfume I smelled on my father's jacket when I was 15. She was the woman whose name my mother never said unless she had to. She was the woman who got the renovated kitchen, the Charleston townhouse, the vacations, and the version of my father that smiled in photos. And now she was calling me our girl. Dad leaned in to hug me. I let him. His cologne was the same as always, expensive and familiar, which made it worse. "Look at you," he said. "College graduate, I told you you'd make it." I wanted to say, "No, Mom told me. Mom promised me. Mom stayed." Instead, I said, "Thanks for coming." That is the thing about children of charming men. We learn early how to keep our voices even. We learn that if we react to the insult disappears and our reaction becomes the problem. Celeste stepped closer, phone still in hand. Smile, sweetheart. This is for memories. I looked at my mother. Mom had gone very still. Not angry, not visibly, just still. Her mouth had the small, careful smile she used in public when someone hurt her, and she did not want me to feel responsible for the bleeding. Dad noticed the tension and chuckled. "Come on, Nat," he said. "It's a big day. Don't make it awkward." There it was, the family motto, spoken by the man who made everything awkward and then handed the bill to everyone else. "I'm not making anything awkward," I said. Celeste lowered the phone just enough for her smile to sharpen. "We actually made reservations after the ceremony. Harrow and Finch. Richard wanted somewhere special." Harrow and Finch was the kind of restaurant with white tablecloths and no prices on the online menu. The kind of place Mom and I walked past, not into. "That's nice," Mom said softly. Celeste looked at her like she had been waiting for that opening. "Well, I thought it would be good to celebrate with the family who supported Natalie properly." The words were dressed up. They still arrived naked. My mother's face changed for half a second. Just half. Then she looked down at the bouquet in my hand and smoothed the plastic wrapper with her thumb. Dad cleared his throat. "Celeste, what?" Celeste blinked, innocent as church glass. "I only meant she deserves something beautiful today." I heard what she meant. She meant Mom was not beautiful enough, not successful enough, not shiny enough to stand beside me in photos. I was about to answer when a voice behind us said, "Then perhaps you should move out of the picture." No one in my family ever forgot that voice. My grandmother Margaret Ellis stood at the edge of the walkway in a navy suit, one hand wrapped around the head of a polished black cane. She was 74, straight-backed, silver-haired, and cold in the way old Southern women can be cold without ever raising their volume. Beside her stood a man I did not recognize at first, older, thin, carrying a leather briefcase. "Grandma?" I said. She had not told me she was coming. She looked at me then, and for 1 second the coldness cracked. "Natalie," she said, "your grandfather would have been very proud." That sentence hit a place in me I had not known was waiting. My grandfather Walter had died when I was 12. I remembered pipe tobacco, peppermint candies, and the way he called me professor because I always carried books. Dad's smile tightened. "Mom, you should have told me you were coming." "I imagine there are several things we should have told each other," Grandma said. Celeste laughed lightly and stepped forward with both arms open. "Mrs. Ellis, it's been such a long time." Grandma did not move to hug her. She looked Celeste over from her white dress to her polished heels to the phone still in her hand. "Yes," Grandma said, "it has." The man beside her opened his briefcase just slightly, then closed it again as if reminding himself not yet. Dad shifted. "Mom, this isn't the time." Grandma ignored him. Celeste's smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. "You look wonderful." "So do you," Grandma said. "New name, new hair, same eyes." I felt the air change. Mom looked up. Dad's jaw tightened. Celeste went very still, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked less like a woman posing for a camera and more like a woman who had heard a lock turn behind her. "I'm sorry," she said. Grandma took one slow step closer. "I said it has been a long time," she repeated. "Cynthia." The lawn noise seemed to drop away. Parents were still laughing somewhere behind me. Graduates were still taking pictures. A marching band was warming up near the stadium. But inside our little circle, everything went silent. Celeste's face did not collapse. Women like her do not collapse in public, they adjust. She gave a small, confused laugh. "I think you have me mixed up with someone else." Grandma's hand tightened on her cane. "No," she said. "I confused you with someone else once." Then she looked at my father. "I won't make that mistake twice." I looked from my grandmother to Celeste, then to Dad. "Who's Cynthia?" I asked. No one answered. And in my family, silence had always been where the truth went to hide. But that morning, on the day I was supposed to graduate from college, the truth finally started walking toward us, wearing a navy suit, holding a black cane, and calling my father's mistress by the name she thought she had buried. Before my grandmother called my father's mistress by another woman's name, I thought I knew the story of how my family broke. I was 15 when my father left. Not dramatically, not with slammed doors or suitcases thrown into the trunk in the middle of the night. Richard Ellis never did anything that looked ugly from the outside. He preferred clean exits, soft explanations, and sentences that made betrayal sound like an unfortunate weather pattern. He sat me down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in November. I remember the smell of rain on his coat. I remember my mother standing by the sink with her arms folded so tightly across her chest that her knuckles had gone pale. I remember the lasagna in the oven, burned at the edges because nobody had remembered to take it out. Dad looked tired in a way I now understand was rehearsed. "Nat," he said, "your mother and I have been unhappy for a long time." I stared at him because children always know more than adults think they do. I knew about the phone calls he took in the garage. I knew about the hotel receipt I found in his jacket pocket when I was doing laundry because Mom had the flu. I knew about the perfume on the passenger seat of his car, sweet and expensive and nothing like the lavender soap my mother used. But knowing something and hearing it become your life are two different things. Mom said nothing. Dad reached across the table like he wanted to take my hand. I pulled mine into my lap. "This isn't about Celeste," he said. That was the first time he said her name to me. Celeste. It sounded like something delicate and clean, like stars, like a woman who would never help ruin a family because women who ruin families should have harsher names, names with sharp corners and smoke stains. "She came into my life after the marriage was already over," Dad continued. "Your mother and I failed each other. Celeste had nothing to do with that." Mom made a small sound then, not a sob, not even a laugh. Just air leaving a body that had been carrying too much. I turned to her. "Is that true?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I wish now that I had been old enough to understand what she was choosing. She could have told me everything. She could have reached into the drawer where she kept the printed phone records, the copied credit card statements, the photo someone from Dad's office had sent her of him and Celeste at a resort in Savannah 2 months before he claimed the marriage was over. She could have put all of it in front of her 15-year-old daughter and said, "Look, this is your father." Instead, she said, "Your dad and I have adult problems, honey. None of them are your fault." At 15, that sounded like weakness. At 22, standing on a graduation lawn with a woman in white smiling at my pain, I finally understood it as mercy. Dad moved out 2 weeks later. He took his suits, his golf clubs, the espresso machine, and the framed photo of our family at Myrtle Beach because he said he wanted something to remember the good years. He left behind the mortgage, the cracked dishwasher, and a silence so thick it seemed to sit in every room like another piece of furniture. For a while he called every Sunday, then every other Sunday. Then whenever he remembered that being a father looked better if there was a call log. He always sounded warm when he did call. That was the worst part. My father had a voice made for forgiveness. "Hey, kiddo," he would say. "How's my girl?" My girl. His favorite words when other people were listening. He moved into a renovated townhouse in downtown Charleston with Celeste within 6 months. I saw it first by accident. A cousin posted pictures from a Christmas cocktail party. There was Dad in a navy blazer standing beside a marble island, one arm around Celeste's waist. Behind them was a kitchen my mother would have loved so much it might have broken her. White cabinets, gold fixtures, pendant lights, fresh flowers on the counter. I was sitting on the floor of our apartment when I saw the photo, eating boxed macaroni because Mom had picked up an extra shift and I had promised her I knew how to make dinner. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor of a brick building that smelled like old carpet and boiled cabbage. The heat clicked loudly in the walls. My bedroom window faced an alley. Mom called it temporary for almost 4 years. Temporary is what poor people call things when they are trying not to scare their children. When college applications started, money became the ghost that sat at our table. I applied everywhere with fee waivers. I wrote scholarship essays between homework and part-time shifts at a grocery store. Mom worked at the county hospital library during the day and picked up weekend shifts checking in patients at an urgent care clinic. Some nights I would wake up at 2 in the morning and find her at the kitchen table with a calculator, a yellow legal pad, and a mug of coffee gone cold. Every time I asked if we could afford college, she gave me the same answer. We'll figure it out. I grew to hate that sentence, not because it was cruel, because it was brave in a way I did not yet respect. Dad had a different version of the story. According to him, he wanted to help, but Mom made everything difficult. She was proud. She was bitter. She did not want him involved because she could not stand seeing him happy with Celeste. I know this because relatives repeated it back to me in soft voices at weddings and church lunches. "Your father tries, honey," Aunt Diane told me once, touching my arm like she was handing me a kindness. "Your mother just makes it hard." Another cousin said, "Laura never did know how to manage money." Even my grandmother Margaret, my father's mother, said very little in those years. That silence hurt more than I admitted. Grandma Margaret had always been intimidating. She lived in the old Ellis house outside Charleston, the one with magnolia trees and heavy curtains and rooms that smelled faintly of lemon oil. She wore pearls to the grocery store. She corrected grammar in birthday cards. She could make a waiter apologize by simply lifting one eyebrow. After Dad left, I expected her to choose. She did not. At least, not where I could see. She did not call my father a liar. She did not publicly defend my mother. She did not come to our apartment and say, "Laura, tell me what you need." She sent Christmas cards with checks that were helpful, but never large enough to change anything. She sent books on my birthday. Sometimes grocery gift cards would appear in the mail with no note, except her careful handwriting on the envelope. I told myself she was cold. I told myself blood protected blood, and since Dad was her son, the rest of us were just damage she did not want to look at. But there was one thing she always wrote. Every birthday card, every graduation from something small card, every note tucked into a book had the same sentence at the bottom. "Keep every receipt. People tell stories. Paper tells the truth." At 16, I thought it was just Grandma being Grandma. Stern, practical, a little strange. At 18, I taped one of those notes inside my desk drawer at college because the sentence made me feel less alone, though I could not have said why. At 22, with student loans in my name and a degree paid for by scholarships, jobs, exhaustion, and my mother's tired hands, I finally began to understand that my grandmother had not been giving advice. She had been leaving breadcrumbs. Back on the graduation lawn, the past rushed through me in pieces. Dad telling me Celeste came later, Mom crying silently in the laundry room, the townhouse kitchen, the birthday cards, the crooked grocery store bouquet in my hand. And now my grandmother, standing in front of all of us, calling Celeste by a name that made my father look like he had forgotten how to breathe. "I'm sorry," Celeste said again, lighter this time, like she could laugh the moment back into place. "You must be confusing me with someone else." Grandma Margaret's face did not change. "I confused you with someone else once," she said. "I mistook you for a harmless little assistant who smiled too much and asked too many questions about my husband's accounts." The man beside her adjusted his glasses. I still did not know his name then, only that he stood like a person who had come prepared. Dad stepped forward. "Mom, stop." It was not a request. Grandma looked at him with the kind of disappointment that takes years to harden properly. "No, Richard," she said. "I stopped once. That was my mistake." Celeste's phone was no longer recording. Her hand had dropped to her side, fingers tight around the case. Mom whispered, "Natalie?" I turned to her. Her face had gone pale, but there was something else there too. Not shock exactly. Recognition. Like a locked door inside her had just opened and she was afraid of what might be standing behind it. "What is she talking about?" I asked. No one answered. Dad tried to smile at me. It was a smaller smile than usual, thin at the edges. "Nat, sweetheart, this is an emotional day. Your grandmother has had some old concerns for a long time, and I don't think this is the place." "The place?" Grandma cut in. Her voice was quiet enough that people nearby had begun leaning in without realizing it. "This is precisely the place," she said, "because this is the day Walter's money was meant to make possible." Walter. My grandfather. The man who called me professor. The man whose funeral was the first time I saw my father cry in public and the last time I believed tears always meant grief. I looked at my mother. "What money?" Mom closed her eyes. Dad said, "Mother, don't." Grandma Margaret rested both hands on the top of her cane. For the first time that morning she looked not at Celeste, not at my father, but at me. And whatever was in her face made my stomach drop before she even spoke. "Natalie," she said. There are things about your college fund that you were never told. Behind her, the marching band began to play the first bright notes of the graduation processional. All around us, families turned toward the stage, but I could not move, because suddenly the story I had been told for 7 years had a crack in it, and through that crack, I could see paper. The band was playing something bright and triumphant behind us, the kind of music meant to make parents cry and graduates feel like the world had finally opened its doors. But all I could hear was my grandmother's last sentence. There are things about your college fund that you were never told. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had misheard her. College fund was not a phrase that belonged to my life. College funds belonged to other people. People whose parents said things like, "We started saving when she was born, and her grandfather wanted her to have options." People who picked colleges based on dreams instead of financial aid packages. People who did not know the exact difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans by the age of 17. I looked at my mother first. Her face told me enough to make my stomach turn. "Mom," I said. Laura Ellis had spent 7 years teaching herself not to react in public. She was good at it, too good. But this time, her careful mask cracked at the edges. Her eyes went to my grandmother, then to my father, and finally to me. "I knew your grandfather had talked about it," she said quietly. "I knew he wanted to help you. But after he died, your father said the money was gone." Dad exhaled sharply. "Laura?" She flinched at his tone, and I hated that I noticed it. I hated that some small part of her body still remembered being corrected by him. "No," Grandma said. "Let her speak." Dad turned on her then, all charm gone from his face. "Mother, not here." Grandma Margaret did not blink. "Where would you prefer, Richard, another 7 years from now, after another lie has had time to grow roots?" Celeste laughed, but it came out wrong, too thin, too fast. "This is completely inappropriate," she said. "Natalie just graduated. Can we please not turn this into some family courtroom?" That was when the man with the briefcase stepped forward. "My name is Thomas Grant," he said, calm as a bank statement. "I was your grandfather's attorney, Natalie." I knew the name vaguely, the kind of name adults said in low voices after funerals and around paperwork. Thomas Grant had been at my grandfather's memorial, standing near the back of the church in a dark suit, one hand resting on my grandmother's shoulder while my father accepted condolences like a man receiving awards. He opened his briefcase and removed a cream-colored folder with a red elastic band around it. My father stared at that folder like it was alive. "Thomas," he said, "don't do this." Mr. Grant looked at him, not unkindly. "Richard, I gave you several chances to correct the record privately." Correct the record. That phrase landed in me hard. Not apologize. Not explain. Correct the record. As if my life had been a document with false entries no one had bothered to fix. Grandma turned to me. "Your grandfather Walter established an education trust when you were 9 years old. It was not enormous by rich people's standards, but it was enough. Tuition, housing, books, a modest allowance if handled properly. Enough. One clean word. Enough would have meant my mother not working until her feet swelled. Enough would have meant no freshman year panic attacks outside the financial aid office. Enough would have meant not choosing used textbooks with missing chapters because they were $20 cheaper. Enough would have meant my mother not saying, "I'm not hungry, you finish it," when there was exactly one chicken breast left in the skillet. I looked at Dad. He would not look back. "What happened to it?" I asked. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. "Investments are complicated, Nat. Your grandfather had good intentions, but the timing was bad. There were losses, fees, taxes. You were a child. You wouldn't have understood." There it was again, the soft voice, the reasonable words, the fog machine my father used whenever a room got too clear. Grandma reached into the folder and pulled out a stapled packet. "No," she said, "that is the story you told because it sounded boring enough to stop questions." Celeste's head snapped toward her. "You have no right to accuse him like this." Grandma's eyes moved to Celeste. "I have every right to accuse a man when the documents show his name," she said, "and I have even more right to accuse the woman who helped him." The air went cold. Nearby, a family had stopped taking photos. A little boy in a bow tie stared at us with a cupcake in his hand. A graduate in red heels walked past slowly, pretending not to listen. Public disaster has its own gravity. People do not want to look, but they lean in anyway. Dad noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flicked around the lawn, calculating damage. "Lower your voice," he said. Grandma did not. Mr. Grant handed her another page. She held it in both hands, close enough that I could see my grandfather's name typed across the top. "Walter put the trust in place before his diagnosis became public," she said. "He wanted one thing done cleanly before the rest of us began fighting over hospitals and hospice and all the ugly little details that come when a family is losing someone with money." Her voice stayed steady on every word except losing. That was the only time I heard the grief. "He named Richard as co-manager," she continued, "not because Richard was the best with money. He was not. Walter knew that. He named him because Richard was your father, and Walter still believed fatherhood meant something." My father's face tightened. "Mother," she said again, "you have used that word like a costume for years. Let us not pretend it still fits." I gripped the bouquet so tightly that one of the plastic seams split under my thumb. Mom whispered, "Natalie, breathe." I had not realized I wasn't. Mr. Grant opened another folder and took out a photograph. At first, I did not understand why he was showing it to me. It was old, maybe 10 or 11 years old. My grandfather sat behind his desk in the Ellis office, thinner than I remembered, but smiling. Grandma stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder. Dad was there too, younger, darker-haired, wearing the same confident expression he still used when he wanted people to forget he was lying. And behind the desk, holding a stack of files against her chest, stood a blonde woman in a black pencil skirt. My eyes moved over her face once, then again. The hair was different. The eyebrows were thinner. The makeup was softer. She looked less polished, less expensive, less rehearsed. But the eyes were the same. Celeste's eyes. "No," Celeste said. Nobody had asked her anything. Grandma turned the photograph so the light hit it cleanly. "Her name was Cynthia Marlowe when she worked part-time in Walter's office," she said. "She assisted with bookkeeping, client files, and trust paperwork." Celeste gave a short, ugly laugh. "That woman is not me." Mr. Grant removed a second page from the folder. "South Carolina Notary Commission Renewal. Cynthia Ann Marlowe. Photograph attached." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A quiet document in the right hand can make more noise than shouting ever could. Celeste's lips parted, but no sound came out. Dad stepped in front of her slightly. It was protective and guilty at the same time. "This is insane," he said. "You're dragging out some old employee records because you never liked Celeste." Grandma looked tired then. Not weak, tired. Like she had carried the same stone for years and was finally setting it down where everyone could see its weight. "I did not know she was Celeste at first," she said. "That is the part I will answer for. I was grieving. I was angry. I was older than I wanted to admit, and she had changed just enough for doubt to do what doubt does." She turned back to me. "By the time I was sure, you were already in college. Your mother was already drowning in bills, and your father had already spent years telling this family that Laura had wasted what should have helped you." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. That was the moment something in me broke cleanly in two. Not because of the money, not only. It was because I finally understood the shape of the lie. My mother had not failed me. She had been framed by the silence left after money disappeared. Every overdue notice, every scholarship essay, every night she sat at the kitchen table with a calculator. Every time I felt embarrassed because she could not visit campus without packing sandwiches in a cooler. Every time a relative said she did not know how to manage money. All of it had been built on a story my father benefited from. And Celeste had stood beside him in white, smiling. I looked at her. "Did you know about the trust?" I asked. Celeste looked offended by the question, which was one of her talents. "I have no idea what these people are talking about." Grandma's mouth tightened. "Cynthia," she said, "your signature is on the transfer request." The word signature changed everything. Dad made a low sound. "That's enough." But it was not enough. It was the first enough I had ever been given. Mr. Grant held up a photocopied page. I could not read the details from where I stood, but I saw the highlighted lines, dates, names, amounts, 2 signatures at the bottom. Richard Ellis, Cynthia Marlowe. My father reached for the paper. Mr. Grant stepped back. "That is a copy," he said. "The original is safe." For the first time in my life, I saw my father look small. Not sorry, not yet, just caught. Nat, he said, turning to me with the voice he used when he wanted to step over the truth and land somewhere softer. You need to understand, there were debts. Your grandfather's estate was more complicated than anyone knew. I made decisions under pressure. I waited. Some foolish part of me still waited for one clean sentence. I'm sorry, I lied. I took what was yours. Instead, he looked past me, at the people watching, at the ceremony beginning, at the phones quietly rising around us. Your mother turned you against me, he said. That did it. Not the missing money, not the photograph, not even Cynthia. That sentence. My mother, who had swallowed 7 years of truth so I could love him if I wanted to. My mother, who had let me be angry with her because anger was easier for a teenage girl than grief. My mother, who had covered for him so completely that I mistook her restraint for weakness. I looked at Laura. Her eyes were full, but her chin was lifted. Then I looked back at my father. No, I said. Mom didn't turn me against you. My voice did not shake, and I was grateful for that. I had learned something from the women who raised me, even the one I did not yet fully understand. I pointed at the folder in Mr. Grant's hands. You did that yourself. You just left paperwork behind. A bell rang from the main stage. Graduates began forming lines. Someone called my college by name. Dad glanced toward the stage like he had remembered suddenly that we were still at my graduation. We'll talk about this later, he said quickly. Right now, you need to go line up. It was almost funny. He still thought he controlled timing. He still thought a ceremony schedule could outrank the truth. Celeste adjusted her white dress with trembling fingers. Richard, we should leave. Grandma looked at her. Leaving is what you do best, she said, but not today. Then she handed me the old photograph. My grandfather smiled up from the paper. Behind him stood the woman who had become Celeste Monroe. Beside her stood my father, young and handsome, and already learning how to hide a theft inside a family story. I stared at the picture until the faces blurred. Then I tucked it carefully inside my graduation program. Not because I knew what I would do with it yet, because my grandmother had taught me one thing, even when I thought she was cold. People tell stories. Paper tells the truth. And that morning on the lawn where I was supposed to celebrate the future, I finally saw the first page of the past my father had stolen. I walked across the graduation stage with an old photograph tucked inside my program and a question lodged under my ribs. Cynthia. The name followed me through the whole ceremony. It was there when my dean mispronounced the last name of the girl ahead of me. It was there when my row stood and began shuffling toward the stage. It was there when the president of Whitmore State smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Congratulations, Natalie Ellis," like the world had not just cracked open behind the science building. I smiled for the official photograph. I took the diploma cover. I moved the tassel. I did every single thing I was supposed to do because I had spent my whole life doing what I was supposed to do while adults made messes and called them circumstances. From the crowd, I saw Mom. She was standing with both hands clasped at her chest, crying openly now. Not pretty tears, real ones. The kind that make a person's face collapse for a second before they remember they are in public. Beside her, Grandma Margaret sat stiffly in the folding chair, cane between her knees, eyes fixed on me like she was holding a line only she could see. My father was 3 rows behind them. Celeste was gone, at least I thought she was. When the ceremony ended, the lawn exploded into noise. Caps went up. Parents cheered. Music played from someone's portable speaker. Graduates hugged each other, laughing and crying and already asking where everyone was going to eat. I stood still in the middle of it, diploma cover under one arm, the program pressed flat against my stomach. Mom reached me first. She wrapped both arms around me and held on too tightly. For once, I did not pull away. I had spent so many years thinking my mother's sadness was something I had to escape before it swallowed me too. That day, it felt different. Not like a weight, like proof. "You did it," she whispered. "We did," I said. She made a sound against my shoulder, half laugh, half sob. Then Grandma's cane tapped once on the concrete behind us. "Natalie," she said, "we need to speak somewhere less theatrical." That was my grandmother's way of saying she had more to tell me. We found a quieter place near the old admissions building, under a row of oak trees that had probably watched hundreds of families pretend to be happier than they were. Mr. Grant stood beside Grandma, holding the same leather briefcase. Mom stayed close to me. She looked smaller than she had that morning, and I hated my father for that too. Dad arrived 30 seconds later, walking fast. Celeste was with him again. She had changed something about herself in the last hour. Not clothes, not hair, something under the skin. The woman in white who had floated onto the lawn that morning like she owned the day was gone. In her place stood a woman with tight eyes and a smile that had become a weapon. "This ends now," Dad said. Grandma looked at him. "It ended years ago, Richard. We are only arriving late." Celeste crossed her arms. "I am not standing here while your mother accuses me of being some woman she knew a decade ago," Grandma said. 11 years. What? It was 11 years ago. Walter hired you in March. You resigned in November. You vanished in December. Celeste stared at her. That was when I knew. Not because of the documents, not because of the photograph, because innocent people correct facts that are wrong. Guilty people freeze when the facts are too precise. Grandma turned to Mr. Grant. "Show her." He opened the briefcase and removed a small stack of documents clipped together with a black binder clip. No drama, no flourish, just paper. That made it worse. Paper does not get emotional. Paper does not care who is embarrassed. Paper sits there, patient and clean, waiting for someone to stop lying around it. Mr. Grant handed me the first page. It was a copy of an employment form from Ellis Development Group, my grandfather's old company. The top line read, Cynthia Ann Marlowe. There was an address in North Charleston, a social security number with most digits blacked out, a signature at the bottom. I had seen Celeste's handwriting before, on Christmas tags and thank you cards she sent after parties I was not invited to. Big looping C narrow T, a dramatic slash through the final E. The signature at the bottom of Cynthia Marlowe's form had the same arrogance in it. "It could be anyone," Celeste said. But her voice had gone dry. Grandma took another page from Mr. Grant and handed it to my father, though he did not reach for it. "That is what I told myself," she said. At first, I told myself grief was making me see patterns. I told myself I was an old woman who did not want to admit her son had chosen a woman who reminded her of a thief. Dad's face darkened. "Don't call her that." Grandma's eyes sharpened. "Which name would you prefer?" For 1 second, no one breathed. Celeste stepped forward. "You have spent years judging me because Richard loved me. That is what this is. You could not stand that he moved on from Laura, so now you are inventing some financial scandal." Mom flinched at the word "moved on." I felt it like a hand closing around my throat. Moved on was such a clean phrase for what had happened. My father had moved on. My mother had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a broken stove. Celeste had moved into a townhouse with marble counters. I had moved into adulthood knowing how to fill out loan applications before I knew how to make an omelet. Some people move on because the road opens. Some people move on because they took the road from someone else. Grandma did not answer Celeste directly. She looked at me. "When your grandfather became ill, his office became chaotic. Doctors, insurance, estate planning. Richard coming in and out, promising to help. Cynthia was helpful. Too helpful. She knew where files were kept. She knew which accounts Walter worried about. She knew which signatures were needed and which people were too tired to ask questions twice." Dad snapped. "That is not what happened." "Then say what happened," I said. My own voice surprised me. Everyone looked at me. Dad softened immediately. He stepped toward me with that practiced wounded look he had used since I was a child. "Nat, honey, you have to understand the pressure I was under. Your grandfather's company was struggling. There were obligations. Your mother was pushing for things during the divorce. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. My parents weren't divorced when Grandpa died," I said. Dad stopped. It was a small mistake. One date out of place. But lies often tear at the calendar first. Mr. Grant looked down at his notes. "Walter Ellis died in April," he said. "Richard moved out of the marital home in November of the following year. The divorce petition was filed the following February." Mom looked at me, then at the ground. Dad's mouth tightened. "That is not the point." "It is exactly the point," Grandma said. "You have been blaming Laura for years for a financial collapse that happened before she ever filed for divorce." My mother's hand moved to her chest. I turned to her. "You knew there was supposed to be money?" She closed her eyes. "I knew your grandfather promised something. Your father told me the market turned, that the trust lost most of its value, that fighting him would cost more than anything left. I didn't have access. I didn't have proof." Her voice broke then. "And I did not want to make you hate him on suspicion." Suspicion. That word landed with a kind of terrible grace. My mother had lived under the weight of suspicion for 7 years. She had let me roll my eyes when she clipped coupons, let relatives call her bad with money, let my father perform generosity with late checks and public speeches. She had swallowed all of it because she did not want to turn me into a weapon. I had called that weakness. I had been wrong. Celeste laughed softly. "This is touching, but none of it proves I'm Cynthia." Grandma looked at Mr. Grant. He handed her one more sheet. "This," Grandma said, "is the document that ended my doubt." Celeste's face changed before Grandma even showed it. A person can deny a name. A person can explain away a photograph. But some papers arrive in a room carrying their own verdict. It was a notarized transfer authorization, the kind of form I had seen in college financial aid offices, full of boxes and legal language. The highlighted sections were simple enough: date, amount, account name, authorized signatures, Richard Ellis, Cynthia A. Marlowe, and beneath the signatures was the notary seal, Cynthia Marlowe's own commission number. I stared at it. "You notarized a transfer you signed?" I asked. Mr. Grant answered, "Not Celeste. That is one of the issues." Celeste's lips pressed into a thin line. "Dad said no one is saying mistakes weren't made." That sentence did something to me. Mistakes. A mistake is putting salt in coffee. A mistake is missing an exit. A mistake is washing a red sock with white towels. This was my mother's exhaustion. This was my student debt. This was 7 years of my father being praised for checks that never covered what he had helped take. This was a woman in white calling herself family on a day paid for by everyone except her. I looked at him. "Mistakes?" He avoided my eyes. Grandma's voice came quietly from beside me. "I did not stay silent because I was weak," she said. "I stayed silent because every time I asked a question, Richard gave me grief instead of answers. He told me I was old. He told me I was paranoid. He told me Walter would be ashamed of me for suspecting my own son." Dad's face flushed. "I never said that." Grandma reached into the folder again and removed a printed email. Mr. Grant did not even need to read it aloud. Dad saw it and went still. Grandma handed it to me. It was dated 6 years earlier, from my father to my grandmother. "Mom is grieving, unstable, and looking for someone to blame. Dad trusted me. Don't turn grief into paranoia." There it was, his voice in print, the same voice he used on me, the same voice he used on Mom. Soft, reasonable, cruel under the polish. People tell stories. Paper tells the truth. Celeste looked toward the parking lot. Grandma saw it. "No," she said. Celeste blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," Grandma repeated. "You are not going to float away from another mess with a different hairstyle and a new last name." Celeste's face hardened. "You cannot keep me here." "No," Mr. Grant said. "We cannot." Then he looked past her. "But Detective Harris can ask that you remain available for questions." I turned. A man in a dark blazer was walking toward us from the direction of the admissions building. Not uniformed police, not handcuffs, nothing like television. Just a middle-aged man with a badge clipped to his belt and a notebook in one hand. That somehow made it more real. Celeste whispered, "Richard." For the first time all day, she sounded scared. Dad looked at her, then at me, then at his mother, who chose himself, of course. Cynthia handled the paperwork, said quickly. "That's all. If something was processed incorrectly, she would know more than I would." Celeste turned to him like he had slapped her. And there it was, the love story, stripped down to its bones. Not romance, not destiny, not the woman who saved him from an unhappy marriage. Just two people standing beside the same stolen money, each waiting to see who would run first. I looked at my father's signature on the transfer form. For years I had wanted an explanation from him. Some reason big enough to make the empty seats and broken promises hurt less. Some secret pain that would turn him back into the father I had tried to remember. But the truth was smaller. He wanted comfort. He wanted admiration. He wanted a new life. And when his daughter's future sat between him and that life, he spent the future. I turned to Mom. She was crying silently again, but this time she did not look ashamed. I took her hand. Then I looked at my father. "So Mom didn't fail me," I said. He opened his mouth. I did not let him speak over it. "You did." The detective reached us then. "Cynthia Marlowe?" he asked. Celeste did not answer. Grandma Margaret leaned on her cane, looking suddenly older and steadier at the same time. For 7 years, my father had owned the story. He had told it at family dinners, in church parking lots, over polite phone calls, and through every late check he pretended was sacrifice. But stories are fragile things when they meet a document with the right date, and by the time Detective Harris said Celeste's real name a second time, the woman in white had nowhere clean left to stand. Detective Harris did not arrest Celeste on the graduation lawn. That would have been too clean. People think the truth arrives with sirens. It almost never does. More often, it arrives with a man in a dark blazer asking polite questions while everyone pretends their hands are not shaking. He asked Celeste to confirm her legal name. She said, "Celeste Monroe," too quickly. He asked if she had ever used the name Cynthia Ann Marlowe. She looked at my father before answering. That was the first mistake. Innocent people answer questions. Guilty people check who is still standing beside them. Richard put one hand on the small of her back and said, "Detective, this is my daughter's graduation. Whatever this is, it can wait." Detective Harris looked at me, then at my mother, then at my grandmother's cane and Mr. Grant's briefcase. "I'm sure everyone would prefer that," he said. It was not an agreement. It was a warning dressed as manners. Celeste was not taken away. She was asked to remain available. Mr. Grant handed over copies of certain documents. Detective Harris gave Celeste a card. Richard took it from her hand before she could look at it properly, like controlling the card could control the investigation. Then the detective walked away, and my father did what my father always did when a room began filling with consequences. He smiled, not happily, strategically. "All right," he said, clapping his hands once, soft and sharp. "We are not letting this ruin Natalie's day." I almost laughed. Ruin. That was the word he chose. Not steal, not expose, not confess. Ruin. As if the damage had begun when my grandmother opened a folder, not when he signed his name to a transfer that helped empty the future of my father and build it. Celeste stood very still beside him. Her white dress looked different, less elegant, more like a costume caught in bad lighting. Mom touched my arm. "We don't have to go anywhere with them." I looked past her toward the parking lot where some of Dad's relatives were gathering in confused whispers. Aunt Diane was there, whispering to a cousin. My father's younger brother, Mark, had come from the ceremony. Two family friends from Charleston stood nearby, the same people who had praised Dad for still showing up. All those years when he mailed birthday cards late and called it fatherhood. They had all heard pieces. None of them had heard enough. Dad must have seen me looking because he lowered his voice. "Nat, sweetheart, Harrow and Finch is already paid for. Let's sit down like adults and talk through whatever your grandmother thinks she found." "Whatever your grandmother thinks she found." "A man will call a document an opinion if he is desperate enough." Grandma Margaret said nothing. She only looked at me. That was the moment I understood that dinner was not about food. It was about the story. My father had spent 7 years feeding people his version in living rooms, church parking lots, and holiday tables. If we walked away now, he would start rebuilding it before the sun went down. He would say my grandmother was confused. He would say my mother was bitter. He would say I was overwhelmed, emotional, manipulated. I was tired of letting him narrate the damage. "All right," I said, "let's have dinner." Mom turned to me. "Natalie, I want to hear him explain it." Dad's face relaxed by half an inch. He mistook that sentence for weakness. He always did. Harrow and Finch was 20 minutes from campus, tucked inside a renovated brick building with black awnings and valet parking. The hostess congratulated me when we walked in. I was still wearing my graduation dress under my open gown. My cap was in the car. The old photograph of Cynthia Marlowe was in my purse, folded inside the program like a secret with corners. Dad had reserved a private room. Of course he had. Richard Ellis never wasted an audience, but he preferred an audience he could manage. There were 12 of us around the long table. Me, Mom, Dad, Celeste, Grandma Margaret, Mr. Grant, Aunt Diane, Uncle Mark and his wife. 2 cousins, and Mrs. Leeton, an old family friend who used to send me cards addressed to brave little Natalie after the divorce, as if I had survived an illness instead of my father's choices. The room was beautiful in the way expensive rooms are beautiful. Dim lights, white plates, heavy silverware, flowers in the center of the table that probably cost more than my mother's graduation bouquet. I sat between Mom and Grandma. Celeste sat across from me because fate has a sense of humor. The waiter came in with menus. No one opened them. Dad waited until the door closed. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded like a man about to lead a prayer. "I want to begin," he said, "by saying that I am sorry this happened today. This, not what I did, not what I stole. This. I made mistakes," he continued. "I have never claimed to be perfect, but every father makes mistakes. That does not mean I didn't love my daughter." There it was, the opening statement. Soft, human, useless. Aunt Diane nodded before she understood what she was agreeing to. Families are complicated. Grandma Margaret set her purse on the table. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. "No," she said, "complicated is not a synonym for stolen." Dad's jaw tightened. "Mother, please." "No," she said again. "You asked us to sit down like adults. Adults use the correct words." Celeste laughed under her breath. "This is absurd." I looked at my father. "Did loving me include taking the money Grandpa left for my education?" The question sat in the center of the table like a knife. Dad looked down, then up, not at me, at the others. That fund was not as simple as everyone is making it sound. Mr. Grant opened his briefcase. Dad's eyes followed the motion. "There were business pressures," Dad said faster. "The company had obligations after Dad died, payroll, taxes, property issues. I made decisions to protect the family." Mom's voice came quietly from beside me. "Which family?" Everyone turned to her. Laura Ellis did not like attention. She had spent 7 years stepping out of photographs, swallowing corrections, letting other people tell stories because she believed peace was better for me than war. But that night, she did not look away. "Because the family I remember was Natalie doing homework at the kitchen table while I worked double shifts," she said. "The family I remember was selling my wedding ring to cover a housing deposit. The family I remember was you telling everyone I had ruined us financially while I was counting quarters for laundry." Dad's face flushed. "Laura, that is not fair." She put one hand flat on the table. "Do not use me to explain what you stole from her." The room went silent. I had never loved my mother more than I did in that moment. Celeste leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed. "You're all acting like Natalie was abandoned in a ditch. She got her degree, didn't she?" The sentence moved through me slowly. "She got her degree, didn't she?" It was the same kind of sentence as "she's fed" or "she's housed." The kind of sentence cruel people use when they want survival to count as care. I looked at her across the flowers. "I got my degree because my mother broke herself paying for what you stole." Celeste's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mr. Grant slid the first document onto the table. He did not pass it around dramatically. He placed it in front of Aunt Diane because Aunt Diane had been the loudest believer in my father's version. "This is the original trust summary," he said. "Walter Ellis established the fund for Natalie's education. Initial deposit, investment plan, named purpose." Aunt Diane adjusted her glasses. I watched her face change as she read. Mr. Grant placed another document beside it. "This is the transfer authorization from the year after Walter's death." He placed a third page down. "This is the bank record showing the funds leaving the education trust." A fourth. "This is the payment made to a design consulting business registered under Cynthia Marlowe." Celeste stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I will not be slandered by strangers over dinner." Grandma Margaret looked up at her. "Sit down, Cynthia. My name is Celeste. Your current alias is Celeste." Richard slammed one palm lightly on the table. Not enough to look violent, enough to remind everyone he wanted the room back. "That's enough." Uncle Mark, who had not spoken all evening, said, "Richard, is that your signature?" Dad turned toward him slowly. "Don't start." Mark pointed at the page. "Is it?" Dad did not answer. That was the first wall cracking. Mrs. Leeton leaned forward, confused now instead of sympathetic. "Richard, you told us Laura drained you in the divorce." Grandma Margaret answered before he could. "No, he drained his daughter before the divorce was even filed." My father looked at his mother with something close to hatred. You would destroy your own son over money? Grandma's expression did not change. No, she said. I am protecting my granddaughter from the man who already stole from her once. Dad pushed back from the table. You have no idea what I was carrying. Dad was sick. The company was unstable. Laura was impossible. Celeste was the only person who understood what I was going through. Celeste sat down slowly at that, but not because she was comforted, because he had said too much. Mr. Grant removed one more page. This email was recovered from Walter's archived business account, he said. It is from Richard Ellis to Cynthia Marlowe, dated 3 days before the transfer cleared. Dad went pale. Grandma took the paper and read aloud. Once this clears, we'll finally have room to breathe. No one moved. Room to breathe. I thought of Mom sleeping in her car for 20 minutes between shifts because she was too tired to drive home safely. I thought of my freshman year roommate offering me her leftover dining hall swipes because I pretended not to be hungry. I thought of my father posting photos from beach resorts with captions about second chances. Room to breathe. That was what my future had purchased for them. Aunt Diane covered her mouth. Celeste whispered, Richard, not lovingly, accusingly. Dad looked from face to face and saw what was happening. The story was leaving him. Not all at once. Stories built over years do not die in one breath. But they were turning, each person at that table adjusting the facts they had accepted, because accepting them had been easier than questioning a charming man. You don't understand, Dad said. I was surprised by how calm I felt. Maybe anger has a limit. Maybe after a certain point it becomes something colder and more useful. No, I said. I think I finally do. I reached into my purse and took out the old photograph, the one from my grandfather's office. I placed it in front of Celeste. Her younger face looked up from the glossy paper, standing behind Walter Ellis with files in her arms, before the new name, before the white dress, before she decided she could step into my graduation and call me family. You came today because you thought you had won, I said. You thought enough time had passed. You thought Mom would stay quiet, Grandma would look confused, and Dad would smile his way through it. Celeste's eyes flicked to the door. This time, Dad noticed too. And this time, he did not reach for her. Mr. Grant closed the folder. The documents have been submitted to Detective Harris, he said. Civil counsel has also been retained regarding recovery of the trust funds. This dinner is not the investigation. It is merely the first time everyone in this family has heard the same version of the truth in the same room. That was the sentence that finished it, the same version of the truth. For 7 years, we had each been given different lies. Mom had been told there was no money. I had been told Mom made things difficult. Grandma had been told grief made her paranoid. The relatives had been told Dad was generous and wounded. Celeste had been introduced as new, harmless, elegant, late to the story. But paper has no loyalty. Paper does not care who it embarrasses. Celeste grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. No one stopped her. At the door, she nearly collided with a woman in a navy blazer entering the private room. Detective Harris stood just behind her. The woman looked at Celeste, then down at a folder in her hand. Cynthia Marlowe? She said. I'm Rebecca Lane with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to ask you a few questions. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The restaurant kept murmuring beyond the private room where still touched plates. Someone somewhere laughed over dessert. But at our table, no one breathed. Celeste looked back at Richard. And Richard, the man who had brought her to my graduation like a prize, looked down at his untouched water glass. That was the moment I understood something final about my father. He did not love Celeste more than us. He loved himself more than anyone. My graduation dinner did not end with a toast. No cake came out. No one made a speech about bright futures. But before the night was over, my mother stood from the table with her shoulders straight. My grandmother took my arm. Aunt Diane cried quietly into a napkin and did not ask Laura to comfort her. And my father sat alone at the head of a table he had reserved to celebrate himself. I walked out of Harrow and Finch still holding 6 yellow roses from the grocery store. They were bruised now. The plastic was torn, one stem had bent. But they were mine, paid for honestly, given by the woman who had actually gotten me there. Behind us, through the glass doors, I saw Celeste speaking to the investigators in her white dress, and for the first time all day she did not look expensive. She looked like a woman learning that a stolen future can come due at dinner. My father called me 17 times in the 3 days after graduation. I counted, not because I wanted to, because after everything that happened, counting felt safer than feeling. 17 calls, 5 voicemails, 9 text messages, 2 emails with subject lines that looked like corporate apologies. We need to talk. Please let me explain. You're only hearing one side. That last one almost made me laugh. For 7 years, one side was all I had heard. His. The first voicemail came before Mom and I even made it back to the hotel. Nat, sweetheart, today got out of hand. Your grandmother blindsided everyone. I know things look bad, but there are details you don't understand. Things looked bad. That was how my father described a stolen college fund, a hidden identity, and the woman in white being questioned by financial crimes investigators at my graduation dinner. Things looked bad. Not I lied. Not I failed you. Not I let your mother carry the shame for something I did. Just things. The second voicemail was angrier. You embarrassed me in front of my family. I don't care what your grandmother told you. There are ways to handle private matters, Natalie. Private matters. That was another phrase people like my father loved. It made cruelty sound like housekeeping. Keep it private, keep it quiet. Keep it where no one has to look too closely. By the fourth voicemail, he had shifted again. Celeste manipulated me. Cynthia, Celeste, whatever name she used, she got into my head at a vulnerable time. Your grandfather had just died. I was under enormous pressure. I made decisions I regret, but I never meant to hurt you. There it was, the first almost apology. It walked right up to responsibility, looked through the window, and kept moving. Mom listened to that one with me at the little hotel table between our beds. She wore sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies, her hair loose around her face. The yellow roses sat in a plastic cup by the sink, trimmed shorter because 2 stems had snapped. When the voicemail ended, she reached over and pressed stop. He's scared, she said. I looked at her. Do you feel sorry for him? She thought about it. My mother always thought before answering. It used to frustrate me. Now I understood it was because she respected words enough not to waste them. No, she said, but I recognized the sound. He used to talk like that right before he asked me to forgive something he had no intention of changing. That was the cleanest thing she had ever said about him. The investigation did not move like a movie. No dramatic press release, no handcuffs on the evening news, no single courtroom where everyone gasped at the perfect moment. Real consequences are slower. They arrive through certified letters, attorney calls, frozen accounts, requests for records, and people who suddenly cannot remember what they signed. Mr. Grant kept us informed carefully. He was not my lawyer at first, not officially, but he became the person who translated the language of consequence into sentences I could understand. The trust records were reviewed. The old transfers were traced. Cynthia Marlowe, also known as Celeste Monroe, had indeed worked in my grandfather's office. She had notarized documents she should not have touched. Money from my education trust had gone through consulting accounts, renovation payments, and a business entity that existed mostly on paper. My father claimed he had misunderstood the structure of the trust. Cynthia claimed Richard had directed everything. They turned on each other faster than fruit left in the sun. That part should have felt satisfying. It didn't. Not the way people imagine satisfaction. There was no joy in watching my father become smaller under the weight of his own choices. There was only a cold kind of relief, like hearing a doctor finally name the illness that had been making your whole family sick for years. The civil case came first. A settlement was reached before trial, which Mr. Grant said was common when documents were strong and reputations were weak. My father agreed to repay a large portion of the money to me over time. Some came from liquidated investments. Some came from the sale of the Charleston townhouse he had once posted online with captions about new beginnings. Some came from assets Cynthia tried and failed to protect behind her newer name. It was not every dollar. Money never comes back whole once it has been used to buy someone else's comfort. But enough came back to change what remained of my life. Enough to pay down my student loans. enough to give my mother back the small retirement account she had emptied one emergency at a time, enough to prove officially and permanently that Laura Ellis had not failed her daughter. That mattered more than the money. A month after graduation, Grandma Margaret invited Mom and me to the old Ellis house. I had not been there in years. The magnolia trees were still there, heavy and green along the drive. The porch still had white columns. The brass door knocker was still shaped like a fox head, polished so bright it looked newly bought. The whole place felt frozen in a version of family I had once been too young to understand. Grandma opened the door herself. She looked older without the navy suit, smaller in a pale cardigan, though still straight-backed, still precise. Her cane tapped once against the wood floor as she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. Mom hesitated. For a moment, the two women just looked at each other. There were years between them, years of silence. Years when Mom had needed someone powerful in this family to stand beside her and Grandma had not. No single folder of evidence could erase that. Grandma knew it. "I owe you an apology, Laura," she said. Mom's face tightened. Grandma did not look away. "I believed my son too long because he was my son. Then I doubted him too quietly because admitting what he had done meant admitting what I had allowed. You paid for both mistakes." The room went still. Mom swallowed. "Thank you," she said. It was not forgiveness. It was the first honest brick in a bridge that might or might not ever be finished. Grandma led us to my grandfather's study. The room smelled like lemon oil, paper, and old wood. His desk was still there, dark and heavy, facing the windows. On one shelf sat the brass compass he used to let me play with when I was little. I remembered his voice, warm and teasing. "Professor, every good explorer needs to know where north is." Grandma opened the bottom drawer of the desk and took out a small wooden box. "This was Walter's," she said. She placed it on the desk in front of me. Inside were things I was not prepared for. A photograph of me at 5 years old, wearing a crooked tiara and holding a picture book upside down. A birthday card I had drawn for him in purple crayon. A tiny plastic dinosaur I vaguely remembered giving him because I thought every office needed a dinosaur. And an envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting. "Natalie, when she is old enough." My hands shook when I opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, not dramatic, not full of grand wisdom, just him. He wrote that he hoped I would go to college if I wanted to, and not go if I found something better. He wrote that education was not about becoming impressive, but about becoming difficult to fool. He wrote that he had set aside money so no one could make my dreams smaller by calling them expensive. Then, near the end, he wrote a sentence I read 3 times. "Never let anyone in this family make you feel grateful for what was already yours." I sat down in his chair because my knees were no longer reliable. Mom stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder. Grandma stood by the window, turned slightly away, giving me the dignity of not being watched too closely while I cried. After a while, Grandma cleared her throat. "There is another account," she said. I looked up. "It is not what Walter left," she said quickly. "It could never replace that. But after I began to suspect Richard, I started putting money aside when I could, quietly. I told myself that if I was wrong, you would still have something. And if I was right." She did not finish. Mr. Grant had prepared the papers. Of course he had. Grandma slid them across the desk, neat and exact. "It is clean," she said. "Every dollar in there is clean." That broke me more than the amount, because by then I understood that clean money meant something in my family. It meant no lies attached. No stolen years, no woman in white smiling over it, no father turning theft into sacrifice, just a grandmother who had been late but not absent forever. The next week, I used a small part of the recovered money to take my mother to dinner, not Harrow and Finch. I thought about it, but that place belonged to the night the truth came due. I wanted somewhere that belonged to us. So I chose a little Italian restaurant near our old apartment, the one Mom and I used to walk past when I was in high school. It had red awnings and candles in the windows, and every year on my birthday, Mom would say, "Someday we'll go in there." Someday finally came on a Thursday. Mom wore the navy dress from graduation. I wore a green blouse she said made my eyes look like my grandfather's. We ordered too much pasta, 2 desserts, and a bottle of wine we did not know how to pronounce. When the check came, Mom reached for it out of habit, I put my hand over hers. "No," I said, "not this time." Her eyes filled. I lifted my glass. "To the woman who actually got me there." Mom laughed and cried at the same time, which is one of the sounds I trust most in this world. I do not see my father now. He still writes sometimes. His messages are cleaner, shorter, probably reviewed by an attorney. He says he hopes one day I will understand the pressure he was under. I think I do understand. That is why I do not answer. Pressure does not create character. It reveals it. Cynthia Marlowe, Celeste Monroe, whatever name she prefers now, became a footnote in legal documents and family histories. I heard she moved to Florida after the settlement. I heard she blames my father. I heard my father blames her. That seems fair. They spent years sharing a story. They can share the consequences. As for Grandma, we are learning each other slowly. She sends fewer cryptic cards now and more direct invitations. Tea on Sundays, lunch when I visit Charleston. Sometimes we talk about my grandfather. Sometimes we sit in silence that no longer feels like abandonment. She was not a hero without flaws. No one in this story was. Mom was too quiet for too long. Grandma waited too many years. I believed the wrong parent because believing him hurt less than questioning him. But I have learned that truth does not need perfect people to carry it. It only needs someone eventually to stop looking away. On my wall now, there are two framed things. One is my diploma. The other is my grandfather's letter. People expect the diploma to mean more. It is official, embossed, signed, proof that I finished something hard. But the letter is the one I look at when I need to remember who I am. My father brought his affair partner to my graduation because he thought the day belonged to him. He thought a white dress, a charming smile, and a private dinner reservation could rewrite 7 years of lies. But Grandma brought the truth. She brought the photograph, the signatures, the emails, the names Cynthia thought she had buried. And by the time she was done, I did not just walk across a stage. I walked out of the story my father had written for me. I walked toward my mother, toward my grandfather's voice, toward every receipt, every page, every quiet piece of proof that had waited patiently for the day someone finally read it aloud. Blood made Richard my father. But truth showed me who my family was, and on the day I graduated, I learned that sometimes the most important thing you receive is not a diploma. It is the record finally being corrected.